All right. Let's talk about this one. It's this whole thing with Brock Purdy this offseason has been so interesting to me. Just the conversation, all the different rankings of quarterbacks. I saw another one come out today from PFF. They had him ranked 13, seen him as low as 16. I've seen him as high as 2. There's a lot of conversation around Brock Purdy, but this is Brock Purdy's first full offseason. Speaking of Brock Purdy, he was there at OTAs today. It was nice to hear from him. He seemed to be in high spirits, sharp, wants Brandon Ayuk to get that deal done as well. Looking forward to that. But really, all the chatter around Brock Purdy should be saved for next offseason because that's when the real conversation is going to be had. Yet, Brock Purdy is the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. He's always going to be in the news. But one thing that we haven't necessarily discussed is what are the expectations for Brock Purdy? And Brock Purdy does have some expectations that are going to be important this year that he hits some of those measures if this team is ultimately going to get over that hump and win a Lombardi trophy for the first time in 30 freaking years. So that being said, what are some of your expectations for Brock Purdy this season?
Yeah, and I think it's funny because we talk about Brock Purdy like he's a seasoned vet. You know, the type of criticism he gets. I think he's criticized more than some of the guys that have been drafted in years before him that were not higher draft picks, but they're not criticized nearly as much and probably haven't had the same level of success that Purdy has had in just his 2 years of playing in the league. But to why my expectations are for him to even take another step forward, Jesse, is this is going to be his first healthy offseason. He hasn't had one as a starter. Last season, he was dealing with the injury. The year before that, he was fighting for a spot on the team. So he's the guy. He's healthy. He's going to be playing with all familiar faces on that offense. There's not really any new impactful guys that are coming in. And this is the third year, in this offense. And what I hope to see, and what I believe we'll be able to see, is that trust between him and Kyle Shanahan will begin to grow, where he allows Brock Purdy to be Brock Purdy a little bit more than we've been able to see him with previous quarterbacks. And what I mean by that is being able to audible on the line, being able to do some things off script, because at this point, Kyle Shanahan has been able to instill how he sees the game, and that's going to, coincide with, how Purdy plays the game. So to me, I expect, we've talked about this, I feel like, for the past 2 years, where the offense is going to be more prevalent than the defense. And I think this is the year that we see that, because, Purdy is playing for a contract. I think the 49ers are looking at it and being like, we got to see what we really have in this guy. Is he the guy that we're going to, pin our franchise hopes on and give him that big money contract as a quarterback? And I think the way that you do that, Jesse, is you give him a little bit more free reign to see, can he get you over that hump? Can he be that difference maker? And I believe he can. I think a lot of people look at what he can't do, and, he's not that prototypical, quarterback as far as size and arm strength. But I think he's elite in a lot of key factors. And I think that especially in this system, he's damn near perfect for this system as far as what his strengths are and what he's surrounded by. So to me, I expect the next leap, and him to really prove that he can be the guy here for the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, you said something interesting, and I think this is a good conversation to kind of throw in the middle of this as well. Is you said that he's proven a lot, but there are other players who maybe were drafted higher, have better physical traits that are given credit for things they haven't necessarily done in this league. When you say that, who's a player or two that comes to mind?
Trevor
'Cause I have
Lawrence.
one. Thank you. Me too. Me too. I agree with you with Trevor Lawrence. It's interesting because Trevor Lawrence if you watch his film last year, it was a lot better than the numbers suggest. I will say that. but there's
And he was
still
injured.
something. And he was, but there's still something to be desired with Trevor Lawrence, and maybe we'll see it this year. But he also might get paid before this year even starts, and I think that if I'm Jacksonville, I'm making him play out this year. I want to see how this year goes before I even think about extending him. And truth be told, I might want to see how next year plays out, and then play the whole franchise tag game with him. I know that that's like not what you want to do with a franchise quarterback or your perceived franchise quarterback, but I got to see more from Trevor Lawrence. And certainly, yes, he's got all the physical traits and he was the first pick overall, and he deserved to be all those things or to be the first pick overall in that draft. But that being said, he's been a little too up and down for me. I got to see it for at least one more year before I'm fully in on Trevor Lawrence. But yeah, he's the guy that comes to mind as well. I mean, all the physical traits, first pick overall. And I think people automatically rank him above Purdy. And I would say that shouldn't be the case right now. He's like the one guy that I think of when you say things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's been a ton, going back in years that are guys that have fizzled out. I mean, Sam Darnold was one of those guys as well, where and you look at all the guys that were drafted in that same draft that Trevor Lawrence was drafted in, Fields, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, all of those guys are no longer, with teams that drafted them and are fighting for, even to be a starter in this league. And you have Purdy out here that all he's done is just win as a starter with the 49ers. Took him to an NFC championship game, potentially could have taken him to the Super Bowl that first year if there wasn't that injury. And then when he was healthy, they did make it to the Super Bowl. So to me, I just think that, there's a narrative where it's like people are kind of rooting. For as many people that I think are rooting for him to succeed, Jesse, there's a large portion of the NFL elites that don't want him to succeed because it makes them look bad as far as, not being in on him earlier, I guess. But I agree with you, man. He's not somebody who I'm like, oh, okay, he's for sure the guy. I think he's going to be the guy just because the 49ers haven't, what else are they going to do? Kirk Cousins potentially being available might throw a wrench, I think, in some of those things. But yeah, I think this year I expect him to get more opportunity, and I expect him to show that he's either the guy. And if I'm wrong, then, obviously the 49ers have a big decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I also find it interesting with Purdy because, like, for those that are like, oh man, I just need to see it for one more year. I don't think that anything's going to change this year with this team around him. I think we know what it's going to look like. It's going to look similar to what it was last year. But I think that there are areas where he can improve. Like what I want to see from him is just find one thing and have a pretty sizable improvement there. So whether that's, using his legs more, we know that he can get mobile, but it's choosing when to be mobile. And I feel like there's certainly opportunity for him to run a little bit more than what he has in the past. And we've seen that when he does choose to run, it's pretty deadly. It's hard to stop. So I would like to either see that incorporated, the ball placement, that improve quite a bit, or his arm strength, which certainly can be worked on. I mean, your arm can get better, or if he gets in these inclement weather games, let's see the improvement there as well, where he doesn't seem to turn into a complete pumpkin if it gets a little bit wet outside. So I'm not saying he needs to improve in all these areas this season, but if he can take one of those areas and take that major step forward in that area, then I think you could see a much better player regardless of what the statistics say. I don't know what it'll look like statistically, but if he can improve in one of those areas, then you're looking at a much better player. And then it's like, okay, the next offseason, you can take one more thing and improve on that. And if you do that for 4 or 5 seasons, then all of a sudden, you're a complete quarterback by the time you're 27, 28. You've got all the things in your tool belt, and now you're just rolling and hopefully winning championships. So that's what I would like to see from Brock Purdy, is just one of those things. You got 4 or 5 things you can improve on that can all be improved on that aren't necessarily physical limitations. And if he can improve on just one of those this offseason and do it in a drastic way, you're looking at a much better player.